You've likely heard of him, a prince who abandoned a life of luxury to sit quietly beneath a tree. He wasn't in search of wealth, fame, or power. He simply sought to understand suffering and discover a way beyond it. According to tradition, he encountered temptation, illusion, and even fear itself. Yet he remained unmoved until he attained full enlightenment. From that moment, he became the Buddha, the awakened one, and began teaching that liberation lies within each of us. But how much do we really know about this story? Did Siddhartha Gautama truly live as the sacred texts describe, or has his image been shaped and reshaped over centuries through tradition, legend, and belief? Today we'll examine both sides of this journey, the historical figure and the spiritual icon, and by the end, you may find a new perspective on what truth really means. After all, between what actually happened and what we choose to believe, the answer may not be so simple. Long before he was known as the Buddha, he was simply Siddhartha, a young prince born around the 6th century BCE in the region we now call Nepal. A member of the Shakya clan, his family ruled a small kingdom nestled between northern India and the Himalayan foothills. His birth was accompanied by mystical omens. His mother, Queen Maya, reportedly dreamed of a white elephant entering her womb, a symbol of purity and spiritual power. Shortly after his birth, wise men were summoned to interpret the signs surrounding the child. They predicted two possible destinies for Siddhartha. He would either become a great world conqueror, a Chakravartin, or universal monarch, or renounce worldly life to become a spiritual teacher, a guide for humanity. This second path alarmed his father, King Suddhodana, who wished for his son to become a powerful ruler, not an ascetic. To steer his son away from spiritual pursuits, the king made a radical decision. He surrounded Siddhartha with beauty, luxury, and constant comfort. Raised in a carefully controlled environment, Siddhartha was confined within the lavish bounds of the palace, shielded from all forms of suffering. He was forbidden from witnessing old age, illness, or death, human realities the king deemed too dangerous for his sensitive nature. In his youth, Siddhartha lived amid music, festivities, gardens, and every indulgence palace life could offer. He married the beautiful Yasodhara, fathered a son named Rahula, and seemed destined for a life of ease and privilege. Yet something within him remained unsettled. Despite possessing everything the world could offer, he felt an absence, a longing for deeper understanding. The turning point came at age 29, when he persuaded his charioteer to take him beyond the palace gates. On this brief journey, Siddhartha encountered 4 sights that would forever alter his destiny: a frail old man, a sick man in pain, a lifeless corpse being carried to its funeral, and finally, a serene monk, calm and composed. For the first time, he witnessed human suffering and glimpsed a possible response to it. These revelations shattered the foundation of everything Siddhartha had known. He understood that suffering was an inseparable part of life, something no amount of wealth, power, or seclusion could eliminate. What his father had hidden from him now stood before him, urgent, undeniable, and real. The world outside was raw and true, the world inside the palace, a carefully crafted illusion. Driven by a profound spiritual unrest, Siddhartha knew he could no longer live as a prince, pretending all was well. In the stillness of night, while the palace slept, he looked one final time at his wife and child, mounted his horse, and departed. He abandoned his wealth, his title, his family, and set out in search of truth. That renunciation marked the beginning of a journey that would reshape the world. A prince who became a wanderer, a seeker who gave up everything in pursuit of answers. No teacher, not even the sacred texts, had yet revealed. Who truly was Siddhartha Gautama? A man like any other, yet with a thirst for truth few dare to follow to the end. After leaving the palace, Siddhartha Gautama immersed himself in a radical spiritual quest. He adopted the life of a wandering ascetic, wearing simple robes and depending on alms for sustenance. For years he studied under various spiritual teachers and practiced intense meditation, fasting, and self-denial. His goal was clear. If suffering was a part of life, he had to understand its root and discover the path to liberation. Siddhartha believed that by completely rejecting bodily pleasures, he could attain a higher state of consciousness. During this period, he subjected himself to extreme austerities, surviving on as little as a single grain of rice a day and meditating for hours without moving, exposed to the elements. His body withered to skin and bone, and his mind teetered on the edge of collapse. Yet despite all his efforts, enlightenment remained elusive. At the height of his exhaustion, Siddhartha experienced a profound realization. He understood that neither extreme, the indulgence of palace life, nor the severity of asceticism, led to true wisdom. Both were forms of attachment, one to pleasure, the other to suffering. With this insight, he abandoned the harsh practices and chose a balanced approach he would later call the middle way. This awakening marked a pivotal turning point. Siddhartha recognized that the key was not in extreme renunciation, but in clear, mindful observation of the mind and reality. Instead of seeking answers outside himself, he turned inward. He found a quiet spot and sat in meditation beneath a fig tree, vowing not to rise until he had discovered the ultimate truth. That tree, later known as the Bodhi tree, would become a symbol of his enlightenment. During his meditation, Siddhartha faced deep inner trials, symbolically represented by the figure of Mara, the Lord of Illusion. Mara attempted to distract him with fear, desire, doubt, and pride, but Siddhartha remained unmoved. He observed every thought and emotion with clarity and calm, not resisting them but recognizing them as fleeting and impermanent. At dawn, after a night of unwavering meditation, Siddhartha achieved what he called enlightenment, awakening to the true nature of existence. He grasped the four noble truths: that life involves suffering, that suffering has a cause, that the cause can be overcome, and that there is a path leading to its cessation. In that moment, he became the Buddha, the awakened one. Even after reaching this supreme state, the Buddha did not retreat from the world. Instead, he chose to share his insight with all who sought freedom from suffering. He established a community of monks and began a cycle of teachings that would spread throughout Asia and eventually the world. His teachings were simple yet profound, focusing on the mind, compassion, impermanence, and non-attachment. This journey, which began with the quiet discontent of a prince and culminated in the birth of one of the world's great spiritual traditions, remains a powerful testament to the strength of introspection. Siddhartha was not merely a man who meditated beneath a tree. He was someone who dared to question everything, and in doing so, found a freedom that transformed not only his life, but the lives of millions across history. Although the story of Siddhartha Gautama is widely known through Buddhist traditions, historians approach his life with greater caution. This is largely because no written records survive from his own lifetime. The earliest texts referencing the Buddha were composed 2 to 3 centuries after his death, raising questions about the reliability of those accounts. Much of what we know comes from oral traditions passed down by monks, eventually recorded centuries later, primarily in the Pali language, in the canon known as the Tipitaka. While these texts carry deep spiritual significance, they do not conform to Western historical standards of factual verification. As a result, scholars view the figure of the Buddha as a blend of historical truth and symbolic narrative. Historians generally agree that Siddhartha Gautama was likely a real historical person, a spiritual teacher who lived and taught in northern India between the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. However, the precise details of his life, including his royal background, the exact location of his birth, and the words he may have spoken, remain subjects of academic debate. Many elements are considered mythological or didactic in nature. For instance, the episode of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree may not be a literal historical event, but a powerful spiritual metaphor. Similarly, stories involving the demon Mara or the miracles attributed to the Buddha are often interpreted by scholars as symbolic expressions of inner human struggles. These narratives convey psychological and ethical truths rather than objective facts. Over time, the image of the Buddha evolved as Buddhism spread across different regions. In India, he was seen as a wise reformer, in Tibet, as a near-divine figure, in China, as a model of harmony, and in Japan, as a symbol of inner purity. Each culture reinterpreted his story through its own lens, reinforcing the idea that the historical Buddha and the mythical Buddha are not quite the same. Some researchers compare this phenomenon to what has occurred with other major religious figures, such as Jesus or Muhammad, a historical foundation layered with spiritual and symbolic meaning, expanding and at times obscuring the original individual. For historians, the challenge lies in distinguishing religious inspiration from verifiable fact, without diminishing either. Still, even the most skeptical scholars recognize the profound and lasting influence of the teachings attributed to the Buddha. The rise of Buddhism, with its focus on suffering, detachment, and mindfulness, left a deep imprint on cultures, legal systems, lifestyles, and even contemporary psychology. Few ideas endure for millennia without resonating deeply with the human experience. Thus, while the historical Buddha remains partially veiled in mystery, his impact is undeniably real. He may have been an ordinary man, but his ideas helped shape civilizations, and for many scholars, that significance matters just as much as any physical evidence of his existence. Between what can be proven and what can be felt lies perhaps the essence of wisdom itself. As Siddhartha Gautama's teachings spread across South and Southeast Asia, His image began to transcend historical boundaries and assume almost mythical proportions. The Buddha was no longer regarded merely as a spiritual teacher. He came to be seen as an extraordinary being endowed with superhuman qualities. The humble seeker gradually transformed into the flawless embodiment of enlightenment beyond imperfection or doubt. In artistic representations, he began to be portrayed with symbolic features: elongated earlobes, signifying renunciation of wealth, a tuft of hair between the eyebrows, representing spiritual insight, and a cranial bump, symbolizing wisdom. These features were not part of his actual physical appearance, but rather expressed what he came to symbolize: an ideal of enlightenment that surpassed ordinary human existence. The Buddha of the collective imagination gradually became associated with qualities such as perfect serenity, boundless compassion, and limitless spiritual power. In some cultures, he acquired almost divine attributes. In Mahayana Buddhism, for example, depictions emerged of multiple Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who choose to remain in the world to help others achieve liberation. Over time, his image absorbed elements from each culture where Buddhism took root. In China, he became linked to Taoist ideas and cosmic harmony. In Japan, he influenced Zen and the aesthetics of silence. In Tibet, he was integrated into a richly symbolic and ritualistic system. In every region, the Buddha was reshaped by the local spiritual and artistic imagination, becoming both many and one. In the West, the image of the Buddha also evolved. During the 19th century, he was romanticized as an Eastern philosopher, rational and ethical, in contrast to European religious traditions. By the 20th century, as Buddhism spread across Europe and the Americas, the Buddha came to be viewed as a symbol of peace, mindfulness, and self-awareness, a therapeutic figure for an age marked by anxiety and stress. This symbolic construction also gave rise to several misconceptions. The popular fat, laughing Buddha, seen in stores and pop culture, for instance, does not depict Siddhartha Gautama, but rather a Chinese monk named Budai, symbolizing abundance and joy. Yet for many, that image became synonymous with the Buddha, illustrating how collective imagination can distort or reinvent historical figures. Still, it is important to recognize that these various Buddhas are not mistakes, but authentic cultural expressions of what the Buddha represents. He became a mirror onto which different societies projected their ideals of wisdom, compassion, and liberation. Each portrayal reflects more about its creators than about who he truly was, yet all help to keep the essence of his teachings alive. The imagined Buddha, then, is more than a historical figure. He is an archetype, a universal symbol of the inner quest for truth, a model of the human being who transcended ego, fear, and illusion. He may not be the same Siddhartha who once walked the roads of India, but he remains a profound source of inspiration for millions, perhaps precisely because he bridges the human and the eternal. At this point in the journey, the question becomes inevitable. Was the Buddha a real historical figure or a symbolic creation? The answer is far from simple. On one hand, there is compelling historical evidence that a teacher named Siddhartha Gautama lived and taught in northern India around 2,500 years ago. On the other hand, the accounts of his life passed down through generations are filled with mythic elements, symbolic imagery, and spiritual metaphors. Many scholars agree that the historical Buddha was indeed a real person, a spiritual reformer who offered a radical new understanding of human suffering. Yet over time, his image was idealized, reinterpreted, and even mythologized by various cultures and religious traditions. In this way, the human Siddhartha gradually became the archetypal Buddha, serene, omniscient, and almost supernatural. This blend of fact and myth is not a flaw in the Buddhist narrative. It is a common trait among all great spiritual figures in history. The gap between what truly occurred and what was later told does not diminish the message's power. On the contrary, myth often reveals a deeper truth than bare historical facts can. It's as if legend uncovers a dimension of the human soul that no record alone could ever capture. In the Buddha's case, the legend acts as a vessel for a timeless message. Awakening from suffering is possible. It matters little whether he literally encountered an old man, a sick person, and a corpse in that precise order. What matters is that, symbolically, these visions sparked a crisis of awareness, one we can all recognize. The legend invites us to reflect on impermanence, detachment, and compassion. That's why the question, did the Buddha really exist, may be secondary to a more profound one. What does his story awaken within us? Even if certain episodes are symbolic or literary, the transformation they inspire in the reader or practitioner is genuine. The legend functions as a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears, longings, and aspirations. At the same time, it is important not to naively accept every detail as historical fact. The ability to discern between the spiritual and the literal, the symbolic and the factual, is a form of critical awareness, something the Buddha himself encouraged. He taught not to believe blindly, not even in his own words, but to verify everything through direct experience. In that sense, the true Buddha may have been less a myth-maker and more a champion of inquiry. Thus, the most honest answer might be, the Buddha was both legend and truth. He was a man, but also a symbol. He lived in a particular time and place, yet his ideas transcend history. His story blends reality with imagination, but its transformative power remains undeniable. It is this fusion that keeps his presence alive, not as a distant figure, but as a living possibility within each of us. In the end, the question Buddha, legend or truth, might best be turned around. What if, instead of seeking external proof, we asked, what if there is a Buddha within every person, waiting to awaken? In that light, what matters is not proving he existed, but understanding what he represents. And perhaps then, the legend becomes truth within us.